phantom pregnancies of Mary I. On July 19, 1553, Mary Tudor ascended to the throne of England. From the moment she became queen, if not long before, she recognised the urgent need for an heir. Without one, her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth would inherit the crown, preserving England's Protestant faith. Mary's desire to restore Catholicism to her country made the issue even more pressing. It wasn't until the 25th of July 1554 that Mary married Philip of Spain. At 38, Mary was well aware of the difficulties that she might face in conceiving. Though not unheard of, pregnancy at her age was challenging. Yet her faith in divine intervention was strong, and she believed that returning England to Catholicism might also bring her the blessing of a son, ensuring the future of a Catholic monarchy. By September 1554, Mary believed that she was expecting. Given the limited medical knowledge of the time, it was difficult for physicians to differentiate between a genuine and a phantom pregnancy. Doctors, like Mary herself, believed she was with child, and by the end of that month, Mary claimed to feel the baby moving within her, reinforcing the belief in her pregnancy. Even her father-in-law, Emperor Charles V, was convinced. In a letter to his secretary, Charles wrote with certainty, "She is now considered certainly to be with child, and the people are pleased with the king and all." News of Mary's pregnancy brought hope not only to England but to Spain as well. For Philip, an heir would cement the Anglo-Spanish alliance and secure Spain's future. A few days later, Charles wrote to his son Philip, expressing his joy at the news. "I am overjoyed to hear of the condition of the Queen, my good daughter. I hope that God will grant us successors through her. I am pleased she is resting and taking care of herself in her condition." The entire realm had high hopes for the birth of an heir, yet the immense pressure that Mary faced to produce one may have played a role in her belief that she was pregnant. Some historians speculate she may have been suffering from a medical condition, such as ovarian cancer, which could have caused her symptoms to mimic those of pregnancy, something her doctors at the time would not have recognized. In November 1554, reports from the Spanish ambassador reinforced the certainty of Mary's condition. He wrote to the emperor stating, "There is no doubt the queen is with child, for her belly is evident, and her gowns no longer fit her." Another report, dated the 14th of November, also seemed to confirm Mary's pregnancy. "The queen is in excellent health, and 3 months along. She is visibly fuller and more colourful, signs that she is happier." By February 1555, however, the situation began to change. Mary became despondent after learning that Philip wished to visit his father in Spain before her supposed confinement. The Spanish ambassador wrote to the emperor that Mary had fallen into a deep melancholy after hearing of Philip's intentions, casting doubt on the outcome of her pregnancy. This phantom pregnancy, the first of two, would become one of the many disappointments in Mary's turbulent reign, leaving her without an heir and ultimately paving the way for Elizabeth to succeed her. In keeping with royal custom, Mary I was expected to enter confinement 6 weeks before her anticipated delivery. Believing her child would be born in May, preparations began in April 1555. At this stage of pregnancy, it was considered inappropriate for men, apart from the king, to be present in the Queen's chambers. By mid-April, all was ready for the impending birth. However, Mary's doctors were increasingly uneasy. They doubted a successful outcome, given Mary's age and fragile mental state. Her loss of appetite was particularly concerning, as they feared the baby might not be receiving adequate nourishment. On the 30th of April 1555, London erupted in celebration after rumours spread that Mary had delivered a healthy son. Church bells rang, bonfires were lit, and the city rejoiced in anticipation of a royal heir. The excitement echoed the celebrations seen when her younger brother Edward VI was born. However, this joy was short-lived. In a letter dated the 5th of May 1555, the Spanish ambassador reported to Charles V that the rumours were false. A few days ago there was a rumour that the Queen had given birth and the people celebrated, but it was all premature. Similar celebrations happened when King Edward was born. On the 8th of May, a Portuguese noble wrote to Charles V's secretary, acknowledging the false reports. He explained that misinformation had circulated both in London and abroad, and he sought to clarify the error. As May turned into June and still no baby had arrived, Mary assured her court that her timing had simply been off. By July, the kingdom was still waiting, but Mary remained steadfast in her belief that the birth was near. In a chilling proclamation, she declared that God would not allow the child to be born until Protestant dissenters were punished. This marked the start of another wave of executions. By this time, most of those around her had lost hope. Although they humoured her outwardly, in private they pitied her, increasing the obvious delusion. Mary, however, clung to the belief that she would soon give birth. Even her ambassador confided his doubts to Charles V in a letter, acknowledging the mounting uncertainty over her pregnancy. The Queen's delivery is delayed, and it is now questioned whether she is truly with child, despite her continued incessance. Rumours began to spread, some more outlandish than others. Some whispered that Mary had never been pregnant at all, and that her swelling had been caused by something else, perhaps even a pet monkey or lapdog. There were also wild claims that a baby had been sourced from elsewhere, with Lord North supposedly tasked with finding an infant to pass off as the Queen's. As August 1555 arrived, the illusion finally shattered. After 11 months of anticipation, Mary emerged from her seclusion. She was gaunt, silent, and humiliated. No mention of her pregnancy was ever made again at court, at least not publicly. Historians now believe that Mary had suffered from a phantom pregnancy, a rare psychological condition where a woman displays all the symptoms of pregnancy without actually being pregnant. Today, this condition remains poorly understood, but it is estimated that between 1 and 6 out of every 22,000 pregnancies are false. Unfortunately for Mary, she became one of those rare cases, a chapter in the history of her reign. It has been suggested that Mary experienced reproductive health issues from a young age, including retention of menstrual fluids and what was described as womb strangulation. During what she believed to be her pregnancy, her body exhibited convincing signs. Her abdomen swelled, her breasts enlarged, and she even began to produce milk, typical indicators of pregnancy. However, Mary's midwife and a lifelong attendant, who had witnessed her suffering from severe menstrual problems in the past, doubted the pregnancy's authenticity. According to reports, Mary often spent hours each day sitting on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest, an odd posture for a pregnant woman. These women, likely familiar with the limitations pregnancy placed on physical movement, saw this as a sign that something was amiss. Their skepticism proved justified. If we compare Mary's symptoms to those of ovarian cancer, we can see striking similarities. Mary experienced a cessation of her menstrual cycle, swollen and tender breasts, and significant bloating. Many of these symptoms align with those of ovarian cancer, which include abdominal bloating, pelvic pain, fatigue, changes in appetite, and disruptions to the menstrual cycle. Late in her life, Mary once again believed herself to be pregnant, though this seemed highly improbable, given that her husband Philip had been absent during the supposed time of conception. This too turned out to be another phantom pregnancy, and Mary died childless, leaving no heir to continue her mission of restoring England to Catholicism. The death and burial of Mary I. It could be argued that Queen Mary I's demise was a consequence of profound emotional anguish, although medical assessments suggest that ovarian cancer was the true cause. Her life was marked by persistent sorrow and disappointment. Mary's early years were characterized by the affection of her father, who regarded her as the treasured pearl of his realm. However, her idyllic childhood came crashing down with the arrival of Anne Boleyn, which led to her father's pursuit of an annulment from her mother. Mary staunchly opposed her father's divorce and his rejection of papal authority, believing that this rejection equated to a denial of her Catholic faith. She could not accept the idea that her parents had never been married, viewing it as a lie that would condemn her soul. As a result, she was cast out of court, separated from her beloved mother Catherine, and denied the opportunity to see her, even in her final days. Eventually, Mary succumbed to her father's relentless pressure, but their relationship was irrevocably altered. When Mary ascended the throne, she viewed it as an opportunity to restore the England of her childhood, a kingdom of enchantment and prosperity. She hoped her marriage would mirror the happiness that she had once observed in her parents' union, before Henry had seduced by Anne. In fact, she had romantic notions about her husband before they even met, envisioning a return to Catholicism that she believed the English people would eagerly embrace. However, her expectations were met with deep disappointment. By 1558, Mary had become a shell of her former self. Abandoned by her indifferent husband after 2 failed pregnancies, she was bewildered by the persistence of heresy she had fought so valiantly to eradicate. Ironically, a woman who revered the martyrs of faith failed to recognize why executing heretics did not yield the desired results. As she lay in her deathbed at St. James's Palace, silence enveloped her, her court having deserted her in favour of her sister Elizabeth, who was destined to become the next queen. This abandonment left a lasting impression on Elizabeth, who would later hesitate to name an heir, recalling how the court had turned its back on Mary in her final moments. With her strength waning, Mary's hours became increasingly filled with sleep and her clarity faded. Yet she managed to draft her will, and ultimately she could not bring herself to name Elizabeth as her successor, stating only that the throne should pass according to the law. Some speculate that she died of tympany, while others attributed her death to the heavy sighs of her sorrowful heart. Her council, noticing her sighs and eager to offer comfort, feared that she mourned her husband's absence. When asked about her distress, she replied, "That may be one cause, but it's not the greatest wound that pierced my oppressed mind," though she withheld the specifics. Mary had offered a lady's pious advice and envisioned angelic children frolicking around her, singing joyfully. Mary's illness prompted a nationwide sense of mourning, yet she bore it all with remarkable patience. She reassured those who grieved, sharing her dreams of angelic children and encouraging them to maintain a holy fear of God, which would protect them from evil and temptation. She urged them to understand that whatever befalls them is by divine permission, instilling confidence that God would ultimately turn it to good. Throughout her life, Mary endured constant trials, experiencing little joy, and save for her efforts to restore Catholicism to her realm. During her brief reign, she faced numerous conspiracies against her, fueled by malice towards God's truth. She commanded her council and servants to remain steadfast in the Catholic faith, and with her final moments spent in prayer, listening to spiritual lessons, and receiving the sacraments of the Church, she departed this world on the 17th of November, 1558. On the morning of her passing, she attended Mass in her chamber, a daily ritual that she never missed, even as death approached. Despite her condition, she participated with fervour and devotion, responding attentively to the priest's words. When the priest proclaimed the Agnus Dei, she clearly and reverently answered each invocation. As the priest prepared to consume the sacred host, she adored it with reverence, closing her eyes, and peacefully surrendered her soul to God.
According to the Duchess, who recounted this moment with tears in her eyes, the last vision Mary experienced was of her Saviour, ensuring her a blessed transition to his heavenly presence. In reality, the last moments of Mary I were far from the grandeur one might imagine. She received her final rites just before midnight on the 16th of November 1558, and the last Mass was held in her chamber at dawn the following morning. After this, Mary slipped into eternal sleep, passing away sometime between 5 and 7 a.m. According to one account, her death was so serene that it went unnoticed for some time, leaving the exact moment shrouded in ambiguity. Once the news of her passing broke, the few remaining courtiers rushed to be the first to inform Elizabeth. Sir Nicholas Throgmorton, in his haste, removed a ring from Mary's finger. Reports vary on whether it was her coronation or betrothal ring, and presented it to Elizabeth as proof of the Queen's demise. However, he was disheartened to learn that the council had already conveyed the news, making his efforts redundant. Mary's body was entrusted to her local attendants, who prepared her for burial in a manner consistent with the practices of the time. As undertakers were not yet common in Tudor England, her physicians and household officers took on the solemn task of embalming her, providing their final service to the Queen. And unlike her mother, Catherine of Aragon, who had been embalmed by her chandler, Mary's own team carried out the procedure. Her surgeons carefully disemboweled her, removing her heart and lungs. The clerk of the spicery and the chandlers filled the cavity with spices and herbs before wrapping her body in cerecloth, a wax-coated fabric used for burial shrouds. Mary was buried in a nun's habit, though given her strong attachment to her husband, this seems very unlikely. The cloth-wrapped body was then enclosed in lead sheets by the sergeant plumber before being placed in a coffin covered in purple velvet and adorned with lace and gilded nails, an arrangement that Mary would have favoured. Following the customary practices of the time, her removed organs were interred separately. Mary's heart was stored in a silver casket lined with velvet and buried in the Chapel Royal of St. James's, while her entrails are thought to have been laid to rest at Westminster Abbey. In 1670, during the funeral ceremonies for General Monk, a royal vault was opened, revealing two urns, one belonging to Queen Mary and the other to Queen Elizabeth. Upon examination, Busby noted that the contents of Mary's urn resembled a red substance akin to mortar, but with less moisture than that of Elizabeth's. For over 20 days, Mary lay in state at St. James's Palace, surrounded by flickering candles, and Elizabeth ordered that the highest honours be given to her sister, mirroring the funeral rites conducted for their father, though with a significant difference. Mary's ceremonies were conducted entirely within the Catholic tradition, and her ladies maintained a constant vigil, praying at her coffin and offering masses for her soul. The funeral commenced on the 13th of December, with Mary's coffin adorned and placed upon the elaborately decorated hearse drawn to Westminster Abbey. A wooden effigy dressed in one of Mary's gowns and holding a sceptre, while wearing a crown, rested atop the coffin. Due to the rudimentary nature of embalming at the time, the effigy took centre stage throughout the month-long funeral, necessitating a lifelike representation. Elizabeth spared no expense in decorating the chapel for the service. The chapel was draped in black cloth, the altar was embellished with purple velvet, and a canopy of the same material was suspended above it. A hearse, square and surrounded by 46 massive candles, weighing 20 pounds each, was beautifully crafted with crowns and roses. Below the candles, a valance made of sarcenet bore Mary's name in gold letters, surrounded by a golden fringe. Within this valance, another layer of buckram with black silk fringe provided further decoration. The hearse was lavishly decorated with various symbols, and beneath it lay a taffeta majesty with gilded dome and the 4 evangelists positioned at each corner. The railings around the hearse were lined with broad black cloth, and the ground beneath was similarly draped. 15 stools covered in fine black cloth stood around the hearse, with purple velvet cushions atop each. An altar was positioned to the left of the choir, draped in purple velvet and adorned with church ornaments. As the chapel was meticulously prepared, the sergeant of the vestry was instructed to guard it until the royal corpse was brought down. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth hinted at her displeasure if the court failed to attend Mary's funeral, leading to a grand procession that featured the highest nobles in the land. The Bishop of Worcester, accompanied by other bishops and the Queen's Chapel, moved to retrieve Mary I's body. While the chapel remained in the great chamber, the bishops entered the chamber housing the deceased. They censed the body and recited various prayers before it was lifted by 8 gentlemen. The procession was arranged in a solemn order, a cross followed by white branches carried by boys in surplices, then the chapel members, and finally the gentlemen, squires and chaplains of lower rank. Officers with torches lined the sides as the procession made its way. Then the overseers, earls, executors, and kings of arms. The body itself was covered by a pall of gold tissue, with a matching crown placed at its side. 2 noblemen, including the Marquis of Winchester and the Earl of Westmoreland, touched the body, while a canopy of purple velvet, supported by 6 gentlemen, sheltered it. The chief mourner, Lady Margaret, Countess of Lennox, was accompanied by the Earl of Huntingdon and Viscount Montague, with her train carried by Lady Catherine Hastings and the Vice-Chamberlain. Behind her followed 14 additional mourners, paired off, and then the other ladies and gentlemen, concluding with the guards. The funeral services were as elaborate and drawn out as customary for Tudor royals. At last, after the extensive ceremonies, Mary was laid to rest in the chapel built by her grandfather, Henry VII. The body was carried to the designated chapel for burial, where the Archbishop and other bishops conducted the final rites. As prayers were offered, 4 gentlemen, ushers, removed the pall from the body, which was then lowered into the grave, with the Archbishop casting soil upon it. Noblemen, including the Lord Treasurer and the Lord Chamberlain, broke their staffs over their heads and tossed the pieces into the grave as a mark of respect. Once the burial was completed, the Archbishop and bishops disrobed from the ceremonial vestments. Following the burial, the noblemen and prelates gathered, joined by the officers of arms. Garter, the principal king of arms, along with 2 bishops, announced the new queen, proclaiming, "Of the most high, most puissant, and most excellent Princess Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England and Ireland. Defender of the faith, God save the Queen Elizabeth." The noblemen raised their hands and caps in salute as trumpets sounded from the road loft. After this declaration, the attendees departed to the abbot's house for dinner. The extravagant ceremony cost over £7,662, a staggering sum, equivalent to millions today. Elizabeth insisted on this elaborate display, as any slight to a Tudor monarch would also reflect poorly on her own reign. Meanwhile, Mary's widowed husband, Philip II of Spain, expressed his sorrow in a letter to his aunt. He wrote to the Queen, "My wife is dead. May God have received her in his glory. I felt a reasonable regret for her death. I shall miss her even on this account." He instructed his representative in England to attend the funeral, ensure the collection of his jewels left behind during his last visit. Among these was La Peregrina, the famous pearl that he had given Mary on their wedding day, which would later gain fame as part of Elizabeth Taylor's estate. In her will, Mary requested that her mother, Catherine of Aragon, be exhumed from her modest tomb in Peterborough Cathedral and reinterred alongside her, with a proper monument to honour both. Despite this heartfelt wish, Mary had not taken steps during her 5-year reign to arrange for her mother's burial to be upgraded from that of a dowager princess. Could she truly have expected Elizabeth to grant Catherine the honours of a queen, given that Elizabeth's own legitimacy hinged on Catherine's denouncement? Ultimately, the tomb was never built, but that should not be taken too seriously. Elizabeth appeared to avoid creating tombs altogether. She never honoured Anne Boleyn with a proper marker for her unmarked grave beneath St. Peter ad Vicula, nor did she construct a monument for her father or her brother. Even Elizabeth herself did not have a tomb built until James I took charge after her death. Mary's grave remained unmarked for nearly 50 years, and accounts indicate that rubble from altars destroyed during the Reformation was piled atop her resting place. Upon Elizabeth's death, she was temporarily interred alongside her grandfather, Henry VII, until James could complete her grand tomb. Once finished in 1606, James exhumed Mary and placed her alongside Elizabeth. The tomb bears Elizabeth's carved marble effigy with her achievements inscribed in Latin along the sides. However, an inscription on the lower portion acknowledges Mary's presence. Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of resurrection. Both coffins were interred in the same vault beneath the chapel floor, with Elizabeth's coffin resting atop Mary's, once more placing Mary in a subordinate position to her half-sister. The historical memorials of Westminster Abbey recount that Elizabeth and Mary's tomb was opened once during the search for James I's remains. The excavations revealed 2 coffins within a narrow vault beneath Elizabeth's monument. It was evident that these contained both Elizabeth and Mary. The upper coffin, larger and shaped more distinctly like a body, was reminiscent of Queen Mary of Scots' resting place. Despite some decay, the area revealed the Tudor badge, a double rose, along with the initials ER and the date 1603 inscribed on the lid. This intimate vault, containing the 2 Tudor sisters, partners in life and death, was a striking contrast to the chaotic decay found in the Stuart vault nearby. Their resting place, serene and dignified, provided a stark reminder of the tumultuous legacy they shared. May they rest in peace while we walk the generations around their strife and courage under these restless skies.